cell could be simple, this one could be stratified, so it's transitional. Okay, do we have any questions before I move on about epithelia? Either group, okay. All right, so now, the other important thing to understand just in terms of this basic tissues are these cell junctions. And you've probably already covered, how many of you have probably already studied a lot of cell junctions, so this is going to be somewhat review. But we have some cells have tight junctions. We want a tight junction so that we could have protection, so things don't come through. We're going to have some cell junctions that are anchoring or adherence. They're kind of blue, so they have a little bit more flexibility. We're going to have some cell junctions that are gap junctions, like we have in the heart cells. And this is so that we can direct, so that here's the two cells, and it's a dedicated passage. So we find this in the cardiac cells because we want to control that electrical impulse as it moves from one cell to the other. So it has to pass through these gap junctions so that contraction is controlled. We might want we have tight junctions in our skin so that we don't get things passing, into our body through our skin. I mean, we have some things that will pass through the skin, obviously, but and when we're putting lotion on our skin, we're just really putting oil on the dead cells. That's all right. That's what they are, And hey, it works. It works, and we're happy with it. So, and then we have desmosomes and hemidesmosomes. I think I do have a couple of slides to go a little bit more detail into these types of junctions. No, I don't. That's it. So, because we'll talk about these junctions as we look at organs, but it's important to just kind of understand why there would need to be different junctions between cells so that the body functions the way it's supposed to function. Now, this is an old manuscript, which I just think is really pretty, and it's a botanical manuscript, and I think it is from the Arab world. And but I was looking for a picture that looked like glands, and glands do kind of look like plants. And if you think about what plants are doing, they're moving the water from the ground and the sun, and it's kind of what glands are doing. They're moving products from one place to another to help the tissues grow, just like plants. So we have glands in epithelium. Exocrine versus endocrine glands. Endocrine means means within, inside. Exo is without, outside. So we have an exo, like insects have exoskeletons, we have an endoskeleton. So endocrine glands secrete their product right into the bloodstream. Exocrine secrete their product into a duct that then goes to wherever it's supposed to go to, like the pancreas. Now the pancreas has endocrine and exocrine glands, and some organs, that's not uncommon. So, this is kind of interesting when we think about merocrine, epicrine, and holocrine, and I think I have a really great picture, I think it's in the slideshow, to talk about these. These are types, when the cell is releasing its product, sometimes the whole cell is released. Sometimes just part of the cell is released, and sometimes just a product from the cell is released. And that's what these mean, and I'll show you an example of that in a minute. And then we would have, simple versus compound. And we can increase the glandular mass of something by folding. So we see sometimes glands with this kind of folded look, like those plants. So, that might be an example of a folded sort of appearance of a gland. So you're getting. I'll show you. A picture here in a minute. Okay. So a unicellular unicellular gland would be like the goblet cells that we saw that secrete mucus in a lot of the epithelial linings. An endocrine gland, the thyroid gland, located right here, right around the Adam's apple, is a thyroid gland, and it's called the laryngeal prominence. But down around the laryngeal prominence is the thyroid gland, and that would be another example of an endocrine. Exocrine, an exocrine, instead of going directly into the bloodstream, these cells are going to release their product into this duct, and then the duct is then going to be going to wherever it's going. So these would be, when I said by folding and branching, so a very simple exocrine gland would just have like a bulb here. It secretes its product, moves through the duct, and goes wherever it has to go. If for some reason we need more product, we can fold that gland and get a lot more product to be passing through this opening. And then an ancinar is a different type of cellular sort of structure, a different type of gland. And this would be so here I'm going to show you some endocrine types of glands. Hormones, and directly into the bloodstream. There is no duct. So the endocrine, hormones, all of that goes right into the blood. And this would be an example of a unicellular gland, like the goblet cells that we saw in some of the previous slides. And then these would be some of these structural classifications, of which is kind of a repeat of the slide we had before, kind of a simple or compound. And they can get very convoluted, and you don't need to write down all those names. I just want you to see how they're very. Now this is, I think, interesting. The classification of these types of cells. So merocrine, which we sometimes call eccrine. You might want to write that down and understand that, because your textbook, you will see those terms kind of interchanged. And it's a secretion released, exocytosis, meaning that product is made in the cell and then pushed out of the cell. Apocrine is the secretion is formed at the apical, what layer, what's that mean? The free surface. This would be like lactation, is a apocrine type of secretion. So part of the cell is actually released. So the product is part of the cell. And lactation is a very good example of an apocrine secretion. So when the milk is released, it has parts of the cell with it, which of course is why it's so good for immunity for babies. And then sometimes we have the whole cell is secreted. Sometimes the whole cell becomes the secretory product. So the secretion accumulates until the cell bursts, and then it releases not only the whole cell, but the lipids and everything else. And this would be an example, would be the sebaceous glands in our skin. And these release that oil. The sebaceous glands have an oil that is released in our skin. We actually have a couple of different kinds of sebaceous secretions from our skin. And this is from your textbook. I really like this. Now, you guys, exocytosis is secretion, out of the cell. What is penocytosis? Or penocytosis, yeah, penocytosis. So cells we actually drink, our cells drink fluids more than they, I think I'm getting these confused, but anyway, the penocytosis is a drinking of the cell. They drink fluids, so it's more often a fluid than a actual element. Okay, so now we're going to talk about connective tissue. So, and I will probably come back to this on Tuesday. So, connective tissue. You're going to have a lot of connective tissue in the lab. We have connective tissue everywhere in the body. Connective tissue binds all of our body parts together. We have all different kinds. We have loose kinds. We have very strict, regular, I don't really want to describe it, very organized connective tissue, and we have some that looks very disorganized. So we have all different kinds of connective tissue. And connective tissue can be many, many different sorts of things. Oh, phagocytosis, this is what I was thinking. Phagocytosis is when a cell is, this would be like our immune system, eats another cell. But actually we're more likely to have penocytosis, which is drinking, which I think is kind of interesting about our cells. But anyway, so these would be the functions. So support, connective tissue. Our bones are connective tissue. You might not know that, but bones are connective tissue. Lipid storage, fat storage. Our adipose tissue. We have a lot of adipose tissue in our body. That's connective tissue. It's connecting, it's transporting, it's communicating. A lot of blood vessels in fat tissue. It restricts movements, articulations, cartilage. It's connective tissue. And of course, we've done immune responses, phagocytosis, transport of oxygen. Red blood. Blood is a connective tissue. It connects the body together. It's transporting materials. And collagen, of course, scar tissue, mending of damaged tissue is all part of connective tissue. And then when we start dissecting the bodies, you're going to come up with a lot of connective tissue. We will, you'll be surprised how much there is. Now, connective tissue can be embryonic or mature. Now, when we refer to embryonic connective tissue as mesenchyme, and it says up there mucus tissue, this is not mucus like it's being produced in our nose. This is a type of tissue that you only find in the embryo, and it's kind of a, I'm not an embryologist, so sometimes I venture off onto these little cliffs called embryology, and but embryological mucus tissue is a tissue that is made, we find connective tissue around the embryo. We don't find that in an adult. Mucus tissue is different. Mucus is different from, the mucus like that comes out of your nose is not connective tissue. That's what I'm sure you understand. But we have mature connective tissue. We have loose tissue, alveolar, adipose, and reticular, and this is referring to the alveolar is very loose. This is what we find in the fascia. When we open up the cadavers, you're going to pull apart. When you open up the skin, you see this kind of webbing type material that's holding the skin to the muscles, and that you find in between the muscles. And this would be loose alveolar tissue. Adipose tissue is fat. Find a lot of fat, especially in humans. Even if you're really thin, you have fat. It's an important part of our body. And reticular refers to the structure. We have these reticular fibers, which refers to these fibers that you find inside this. Dense tissue was very regular. We have regular and irregular and elastic. And again, this comes from the materials that make up this type of tissue. And I'm going to show you slides to go through each and every one, and we'll talk about what's in each and every one. Cartilage, of course. You probably already had some cartilage in the lab. The cartilage is what we find in between our joints. We have fibrous cartilage, symphysis joints that we've looked at this week in the spinal cord and the spinal column. We have symphysis fibrocartilage in between, that makes up the discs between the vertebrae. And of course, bones is these osteocytes lay this down, and we'll talk about this. I love to talk about the bones and the way the bones form, the way they lay, these osteocytes lay down this matrix, and then we'll talk more about it. It's very fascinating. And then we have liquid, which would be blood and lymph, connective tissues, because these tissues do circulate through the body. They communicate. You know, they are connecting, keeping the body connected together. So connective tissue means it's just an extracellular matrix in cells. That's what it is. But how that is formed and what is in it is what makes all those different types. So we might have elastic fibers, collagen fibers. Here would be these connective tissue cells, and then this would be like a fluid, an extracellular fluid. And these would be representative types of cells that you might, I see some perplexed looks here. Is there a question? No? Okay. And then these would be the types of cells that you might find. You're not going to find a tissue that looks like this. This is just sort of anything that you could find, you would find. So we might find mast cells and blood vessels and collagen fibers. This would be adipose tissue. These are just an example of what you might find in types of cells you might find in connective tissue. Okay, and this would be this example of this embryonic mucus tissue, connective tissue. We would have this mesenchyme, this is mesenchyme, and this ground substance, and the nucleus, and then these reticular fibers. Is what you're going to find in mesenchyme. And this is an embryonic tissue. So this is, does everyone know the difference between an embryo and a fetus? Okay. So this is embryonic. So this is very, very early development. And then this would be an example of this mucus, like you might find in the umbilical cord. This is embryonic mucus. It is not the mucus that comes out of your nose. It's very, very different. And here are these epithelial cells on the surface of the umbilical cord. And ground substance, collagen fiber, and nucleus of fibroblast. Okay, and then these are these types of mature connective tissues again that I showed you pictures of this, or you looked at these a minute ago, the words. Anyway. The areolar, adipose, dense fibrous, and reticular. Dense fibrous tissue, tendons. Those are dense. That would be an example of dense, regular connective tissue. Adipose in the superficial fascia for fat storage, areolar, very loose, reticular. This you find more in some of the organs, the liver, spleen, lymph nodes, bone marrow. And I know we're running out of time, and we'll come back to this connective tissue sort of topic again. But here you would find this is this areolar. Let's stop here before we get too much more detail.